All right, I am going to start recording. Yay. Welcome, everybody. So welcome to Coaching Agile Journeys. We've been doing this for over 3 years now, but in case it's your first time, so we'd love to know if this is your first time, just hang it in the chat. The community that has grown around this has been really amazing. So we're so grateful. And we're just a bunch of volunteers that come together and we do these monthly events and sometimes more frequently than monthly. So I'll share a little bit more about that as we go forward. So our tagline's like, we're committed to living our Agile journey to the fullest and we want to keep learning. And so we just find people who want to come on and share their experiences with us and the rest of the Coaching Agile community. And when we started this 3-something years ago, there were no virtual communities like this or virtual meetups. And so it was really our passion to set up something that was interactive and meetup oriented, that you didn't have to go to a place or drive anywhere to do. So this is us. We have Open Leadership Network as a sponsor for Coaching Agile Journey. So if you'd like to know more, please head over to openleadershipnetwork.com. And here, if you see our faces, we are the co-hosts. Wave to everybody. You can find us also, you can find out more about us on coachingagiljourneys.com. And so we do this all in our own time, and we pay for all the tools and the website and Zoom stuff to keep going. So if you love our events, we'd really super appreciate some donation to help keep us going. And I want to share really briefly our next event coming up with John Jorgensen on December 9th at noon Eastern Time. He's going to talk about how to work with leaders who go first. Then the week after that, we have a lean coffee. So head on over to our website, register for those events that you can join. And I'm going to stop sharing right now because I am going to turn it over to Heidi. And everyone told me I should meet Heidi even way before I met her. And we finally got a chance to meet in person last year at Lean Agile US, which I'm so grateful. Mm-hmm. And of course, at some point I had to ask her, were you willing to come on to speak for Coaching Agile Journeys? And gratefully she said yes. But not only she said yes, she was like, hey, I could demo my new talk. And I was like, this is awesome. So we're so excited you're here. Thank you so much for taking an hour of your valuable time to share with the Coaching Agile Journeys community.
Sure, my pleasure, Heidi. Thanks to Heidi and all the co-hosts for the invitation. How's my audio? Can you hear me okay?
It's good.
Sounds great.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so we'll jump right into this. I do have slides, so I'll take you through a talk, and then we should have time for Q&A at the end of it. Sound good?
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, so the topic here is how do you get better at reteaming when scaling your company? And just to point this out, because I hear the word scaling used a lot in Agile circles, but everyone's always talking about scaling Agile practices out in a company that's maybe established already. I'm talking about reteaming and morphing as your company grows, as your company scales. So that's kind of one nuance to this word scaling. I hear it used in different ways, but I'm talking about deliberate company building. That you're in a good situation when your company is growing and scaling, and so that's the context here. So, I love to talk about research on teams, and for a very long time, I've been, like many of you, I love to learn. I read a lot of different books about teams. How can I be better at what I do? I work at Procore Technologies. I help teams, groups of teams, directors, many different people at my company get better at what they do, kind of to pursue excellence. And some of the literature that I've read in the past would assert things like, well, what we're really going for is stability, or like keeping teams more the same as opposed to acknowledging and leaning into change. And that always kind of sat a little differently for me because I've always been in fast-growing companies. So when I see things like this, I think to myself, wait a minute, my companies haven't been, more towards stability. It's been a lot of growth. I mean, for example, the company I'm in right now, we've added 1,000 people in the past 2 years. That's a tremendous amount of growth. And you can imagine the morphing and changing. Leaning into something like this has always felt a little bit inappropriate to me. And I think things are changing. Researchers are coming around. This is a wonderful book from Amy Edmondson, who's pretty well known in the Agile space for talking about psychological safety. But she's acknowledging that teams have constantly shifting membership. We're dealing more with change than things that stay the same. And so I always kind of wondered about that. Again, here's I've been in software for about 20 years, so a little bit of background about me. The first startup I joined, I was the 15th employee, and I left when we were about 800. And, we're talking a very successful company. These aren't startups that failed. My experience maybe is unique in startup circles because I worked for companies that really thrived and got better and better at what they did. I was on the original team. We built GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar. And this company grew and morphed and changed over the years. The second startup that I was at called Appfolio, I was the 10th employee. I left when there were about 600. This is an early team photo when we went whitewater rafting as a group, which was an awesome kind of bonding experience for us. You'll notice the oar that we're holding in the front that was spray painted in our CEO's garage. We all signed this oar, signaling kind of the beginning of this company. Appfolio grew, changed, and morphed. It's traded on the NASDAQ now. It went public June 2015. Very proud of this team, very proud of this company. But we reteamed even more deliberately and more dynamically, I would say, than the first company. And you'll learn about a few of the ways that we did that as we scaled, because you got to put the people somewhere. I mean, if you start with one team like this, well, what's going to happen? You can't just have this one big stand up with the whole company. And you might try, but you might not get a lot of other things done. So this is a second company that I was a part of, Procore Technologies, where I'm here right now. As I mentioned before, we've added about 1,000 people in the past 2 or so years. We make software for the construction industry and really love Procore. We're based in Southern California. We have offices in other parts of the States and in Canada, Australia, London. We're really trying to change the face of construction and make the lives of people in constructions better. And so, our mission is to connect people to this global platform that we're building. And one of the exciting things there is we have this open API where people can actually build businesses integrating other solutions in construction with Procore. So there have been some exciting case studies from that. But anyway, I really appreciate Procore, and we have a lot of interesting things going on with reteaming, and we'll get into that a bit as well. So from my experience and from talking to worldwide colleagues, I wrote this book called Dynamic Reteaming. And in this research that I did, and I took a very bottoms-up approach to the research. I would interview people, transcribe the data, code the data for patterns. And really what I discovered, this was a process of discovery in writing this book, was that it wasn't just us. It wasn't just the companies that I was a part of that I just mentioned that were growing and changing and morphing and reteaming. It was other companies as well. And really, reteaming happens in some predictable ways and very predictable patterns. And this is just a brief overview of those. I'm going to talk about these structural patterns right now and probably why reteaming happens, but then we'll dig into some strategies to help you cope with all of this stuff as your company scales. Because I think it's something, especially if you're at a fast-growing company, that you can prepare for and that you can lean into. So the first pattern here, isolation, happened at the first startup that I was at. We were building a product that was failing. We had to pivot and create a new product to save the company. The product we created was called Go to My PC. I was a part of this team. So people were taken or invited from different teams that existed already and were put to a team off to the side. We were given complete process freedom and we were able to move quickly. This was back we were liberated from the waterfall ways of working that were very common back then. So we were this isolated team that got to move really quickly. Happened at the second startup I was at as well, when we catalyzed a new product line called SecureDocs, which actually is another company in Santa Barbara, another isolated team off to the side, given process freedom. So that reteaming enabled people to work differently, to do something new. That second team was liberated from like a very predictable 2-week Scrum pattern. They needed to work quickly and differently with faster feedback loops, and they were able to do that since they reteamed. So isolation pattern. One by one pattern of reteaming is a very common one. So common that people might not realize that if you add one person to an existing team, or if one person leaves an existing team, you really have a new team system. So people, we're familiar with hearing about onboarding or different ways to bring aboard new employees. That's part of getting better at reteaming for the one by one pattern. And also there's deliberate things that you can do when people leave your team or leave your company. So what did they do that you want to carry on that might not be in their formal job description? There's some great techniques from organizational relationship systems coaching for when people leave teams and leave your team system. Grow and split happens, it will happen with every startup that you're a part of. If you have that original team, people are added, you're going to split into either 2 teams or 3 teams. I see that as a very common pattern. People think, oh, maybe we can get more done if we just add people to our team, right? And then inevitably they always kind of split. Things take longer, work becomes unrelated, or maybe we want to focus differently on the work, so we split off into a separate team. So the grow and split pattern is one that you'll see. And it's opposite, it's friend the merging pattern. I have a lot of that going on where I hang out these days. Merging pattern when teams come together for a variety of reasons. And I've seen a trend of teams coming together and reforming around different opportunities and kind of gel the whole team and then enable people to kind of reform around a list of priority work. It's also, merging of companies. You can have these patterns at different levels in your company as well. The last one is the switching pattern. And people tend to maybe get sick of what they're doing and want to work with different people or work on a different topic. And so switching is the final pattern of reteaming. So I think these are the structural things that happen, but well, why? Why does this stuff go on? It could be the company is growing, so we need to put the people somewhere. So that's, what we're going to dig into pretty much in this talk. It could be a new worker focus. Maybe people switch because they want to deliberately share knowledge, not have one team holding all the information or knowing all the things about that one feature. You want to kind of have a more sustainable outlook for your development, and so you spread the knowledge deliberately. The final reason, stagnation and learning. I think as humans, again, sometimes we want to change. And so what opportunities can we provide in our companies so people can be renewed and work on something different, but stay within our companies? So I think that's something that we can think about. So there's a lot of stories in this book, Dynamic Reteaming, about why teams change, the structural patterns of how, as well as a lot of practical tactics. And so let's dig in a bit more to this topic of growth. So 5 ways to get better at reteaming as your company scales. Okay, so this is the first of the 5. So building relationships within and across teams. I think this is something that definitely is a practical thing that we can do. So again, we're not trying to kind of fight the system and trying to keep stability as the goal. We're kind of leaning into the idea that, stuff is going to change, it's going to morph, we're going to reorg at many different levels. So how can we get better at those kind of changes? So the first way is building relationships. I love this activity. This is an activity I learned from Lisa Atkins. It's called Market of Skills. And in this activity, it helps deliberately accelerate us knowing each other. So we make posters, and you can do it with people in person. I have a picture here of facilitating this with a team that was distributed. And everybody makes a poster about themselves. These are the skills I bring to the team. These are my interests outside of work, what I want to learn in the next few months, and what I offer to teach other people on the team. And so I find when doing a deliberate activity like this, it just makes it quicker that people know more about each other. Things that wouldn't necessarily come up if you were walking by, or actually in the case of distributed teams, you're not really going to be walking by each other or hanging out by a water cooler. So you might as well do something to try to accelerate people knowing each other. So this is one activity that I just love to do. I do it with groups of people. I'll do it with, like, let's say a UX group that works across multiple teams. If they've had changes a lot, I'll do it with actual cross-functional teams. I'll do it with people that don't write software. I'll do it with a wide variety of groups. I did it for an office at one point. So it's really a practical activity to get to know each other. I think the other thing is that, especially as more and more of us are working in different buildings or different locations, turning on the video is another way that you can build the relationships. This is a story of when I was consulting at this one company. I was on the phone with two gentlemen, and I heard a dog barking in the background, and I was like, "Oh, hold up your dog." And so this gentleman held up this dog right here, and it's a Pomeranian. And then the next guy who was on the call with us, he's like, wait, I have a Pomeranian too. And so he held up, I'm like, well, hold up your dog. So like he held up his dog. But the thing was, they had worked together for like more than 5 years, and it only took, it was like, why didn't they know that they both had the same kind of dog? These are not the common dog, I don't think. And so I think, getting to know each other means seeing each other as much as we can, like seeing the video. It's fine to turn it off every once in a while, but at least like have a little bit of FaceTime with each other to get to know each other. So I think turning on the video is helpful. Another activity that I like to do to build relationships within teams and across teams is another one from organizational relationship systems coaching. This is a picture of an activity called Lands Work, where in this cross-functional team, we have the roles that are shown in the left of your screen there. Looks like product marketing, product managers, engineers, QA engineers, user experience, and basically through a facilitated activity, what you can do is share the challenges that you have in each role, and the people that are not in the role usually know what these challenges are and kind of name them. And through a series of steps, people can really like connect through sharing their challenges and how they want to help each other across different roles. Excuse me. Another thing you can do with roles is even simpler than this, and you can find out how to do this activity in the book, Creating Great Teams, which maybe we can send to the audience here after this or post it somewhere. But the book, Creating Great Teams, shows the steps for Lands Work. And it's really powerful. You can do it here. I did it with, this was a tribe at the time, which is a group of teams sharing how they feel about each other's roles and how they can help each other. But you can even do things as simple as have a poster for each role, like product manager, engineer, quality assurance, whatever your roles are, and work with the team to identify those roles. And then just write what we need from this role. I'm in this role. Here's what I want you to know. Just as simple as those two things usually fosters a lot of offers to help each other. And I think that helps connect us and bring us closer. And yeah, so having like anchoring to roles and having some consistency about roles across your teams makes it easier when you switch roles. And there's some research, Harvard professor Ruth Wagaman and friends wrote an article about that. Just like getting that role clarity makes it easier as your teams change. Experiences together is another thing that you can do. This is from a company I was at Appfolio, where we would take annual overnight trips with our R&D org, with our product groups and engineering groups. We went whitewater rafting. This gentleman fell out of the boat, but he was fine. Having experiences together that you can look back on is another way to build teams and to build the relationships that make it easier when your teams change. You don't have to go to extremes like this, like an extreme sport of whitewater rafting. You can go and participate in a local community event. You don't have to pay for activities, but if you have budget for activities for teams, then teams can choose what they do. So after, let's say, a market of skills type activity, they'll find common ground. Maybe you learn that there's a lot of foodies on your team and they want to go have a cooking lesson. It's always nice when teams have budget to build their relationships. I think a lot of the times if you know and care about the people you work with, everything else is easier. So doing things to bring us together really pays off. So, all right, so how do we make it easier as our companies scale? So the next thing is helping to coach people through culture change. Because if you're a company of 10 and then suddenly you're a company of 800, it's going to be a different company. It's going to feel different, especially to the people that were there in the beginning. You're more generalists. When you're working together as a startup, you're doing a lot of different things, and people tend to specialize as your company gets bigger. Processes come into play. It's just a natural part of growth. And so people might ask this question, and this is one that I've heard over and over again. Well, Heidi, how do we maintain our culture? How do we keep those pieces of our company identity so we don't lose them? How do we keep it all? And I think it's really hard, but there are things that will stay constant, and there's a lot of things that will change, and it's just going to feel different as people join your company, as you scale your company. And we pay a lot of attention when we're hiring to onboarding programs and how we can kind of get better at bringing that one person onboarded through the dip of, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here in my job. And then they get comfortable and they're like brought up to speed. So every new person kind of goes through that dip. But it's also about, well, what about the people that are there already? Having the changes of adding new people into the mix feels different. And I think we really need to pay attention to the people that are already there and kind of facilitate and help those people feel like they still belong at the company. So how do we kind of lean in and facilitate some re-belonging? I like to do an activity, I call it the story of our team, where it really kind of connects people that have been there for a while and to people who are newer. This is a picture of a team that I did this with. They were a group of mobile developers. And so what I had them do is stand up in a line from when you joined the company. And the people on the left had joined years prior, and the people on the right had only been there for like a month or two. And behind them, as you might see on the windows, we have like flip chart paper put in a line, and we have a horizontal line, which is a timeline drawn in the middle. And so basically when I facilitate this, and I can give you the instructions for how to do it if you're interested, is I tell them, talk with the person next to you. Well, first they talk with each other to line up in the order in which they join the team. And then I say, well, talk to the person next to you. And on your timeline, just note down the significant milestones that have happened through this course of time. And people write some interesting things up there, maybe when they joined, when some people left, key milestones in the development of the team or the development of the company. And then I ask them to tell the story of the team. And we take our handy recording device, and each person speaks and they tell the story of the team. We archive the video, maybe add it to one of the chat channels that we have in our internal system. And then when somebody joins and 2 weeks later, they can, kind of get the context of the team. But I find that this helps connect people together because they hear about, I also encourage them to say, well, why did you join this team or this company, and what does it mean to you? And when we anchor to those origin stories, it tends to increase the positivity of the situation. And I think it really just brings people together. So there's other activities of how do we kind of glue the identity together when the company is scaling and growing really fast. I think it's something we can lean into and do deliberately. So we acknowledge that this happens. We acknowledge that there are some people that have been here for a while and there's some people that just joined. And we all want to be there. We all want to help this company succeed. But some of the ways of the past are not appropriate anymore. Some of the new ways might not set well. So how do we facilitate this kind of belonging across all of these generations at the company? I think this is a fascinating area to dig into. Another thing you can do is as the companies grow really big, we had this open space event at Procore. We had about 350 people. This is more than a year and a half ago in R&D. And we posed a challenge, how can we collaborate better across our different squads? We have a tribe and squad model. that actually works pretty well. People are like, don't copy the Spotify model. All right, well, I've been at like 2 companies that have been using a model similar to that for more than 13 years. So I really don't buy that. They're probably trying to sell you something else when they say that. But anyway, this structure has worked well for us. So we had this open space. And so the idea is when the company grows and scales really quickly, how do you help find people that have shared interests across these different tribes and squads, right? So, you know, in the Spotify sense, with that Spotify model, we have guilds, right? And so one really cool thing that emerged after this open space event that we had was the formation of different guilds and interest groups, and people stepped up as leaders. So we did kind of an open leadership type thing here that I know some of our co-hosts are into, and we partnered with Daniel Mezek for this event. But anyway, one thing you can do as your company scales is facilitate activities where people can step up as leaders for one, but also find each other across these large organizations so that then they can get in action together to help kind of develop the company. So that's one thing that you can do. So what glues us together from like the beginning teams to, you know, later team of teams? You know, you have 10 people, suddenly you have 800, you have 900, you have 1,000. Like one of the things I think is really symbols. Rituals and symbols help bind us together. So remember that photo I showed you of that early whitewater rafting trip? That rafting oar, which is in the upper left here that we signed, became something that we did all the time. We had, when we had like the preview of our AppFolio property manager software, we created software for property management companies, we signed an oar. To the upper right here, you see 100 customers. Whoever was there signed an oar. So this is like really a tangible belonging tool as the company grows and scales. When we went public, we signed an oar. When we started a vertical to make software for law firms, we signed an oar. So across different stages of the company, this is one kind of very visible, very tangible oar. So when I talk to startup founders and people at really small companies, it's kind of like, okay, what are your symbols going to be? How you can deliberately kind of plan these and have this as a constant as your company scales. The other thing is useful values. And I write useful values because these 3 are useful. These are Procore values: ownership, openness, and optimism. You can remember these values. Before I joined Procore, I was a consultant helping different teams get better at what they do. And one thing that I noticed was, wait a minute, people talked about bringing openness to things. People talked about taking ownership. They actually used the values. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I actually helped write values at previous companies, but I couldn't tell you what they were because maybe they were too complex or too many words. Maybe I can remember 1 or 2, but useful values are something that you can plan at earlier stages of your company and have them as, you know, people say like, oh, hashtag optimism. You know, people say things like that and kind of use the values. They're more like principles at this company. So I think it's another thing that we'll have these values as a small company and as a very large global company that we are now. And so, you know, we do things where we will defend the values. And that is something that shows that they're very resonant. I think it was Joseph Grenny. He wrote the book, Crucial Conversations. He's like, it was either him or Patrick Lencioni. I think it was Joseph Grenny, that values are meaningless until you stand up to defend them. Rituals are glue. At the second startup I was at, we had these hack days for 24-hour hack days. It was a repeatable rhythm. They'd have them like twice a year. It was a ritual. It was something that binds us together because you do it over and over. And it's something that they did it cross company and they did it within their engineering and product groups. But if you have rituals at your company, it's another kind of tip to keep it together when you're scaling. So what are those things that you always do? Maybe you always have a certain kind of party in December. That's a ritual. Like, what are the other rituals that you do? And I would say the rituals that are maybe specific or unique to your company that give it kind of a flair. All right, so third way to make it easier when your company scales is including people and fostering agency. All right, so we're gonna switch around a lot. We're gonna reteam, we're gonna have reorgs. Okay, how can we include people in it? And I think one of the things is to have visual cues, like visual aids to show us the changes that are happening. This is a simple picture of, like, let's say a tribe is having some changes. You can see on the left, we have the cafe tribe and the tea tribe, and then the names of the squads within it: Olay, Latte, Mint, and Zing. And then the people that are in those groups, those teams, are in green. On the right, at the bottom, we see Eva, Sven, and Valerie. They're moving a little bit over from the left. So we can see the whiteboard. These are actual, well, recreated whiteboards. On the left here, you have the current state, and on the right is the future state. This is a simple thing that you can do to help prepare people and include people in a change that's about to happen. And every time that I'm with groups that do something like this, the people whose names are on the board, they're like, wait a minute, that's not incorrect. I'm actually on this squad over here, or I'm over here. As the companies scale, it's harder and harder to track who is where. Managers might have a spreadsheet somewhere over here, or using a commercial tool to track which people are working on what. But I think it really helps to have visuals like this, and you can take photos, you can share them in your chat channels or through email, whatever systems that your company uses. But I think in visualizing the before and the after helps people be included in changes. And giving people the ability to actually help shape the change is even better. Like, what if you plan it together? This is a photo of it was a reorg involving about 80 people. And some of the teams it was like remember that grow and split pattern I talked about from before from the book? So it can happen at the team level, it can happen at the tribe level, it can happen at the company level, the department level, the company level, and more. And so this was a tribe that grew big, and it was splitting into 3. And so where were the existing squads going to go? And then there were opportunities for people to switch places. And then there was new hiring happening. So basically what we did was we put it all on whiteboards, what we thought the new structure was going to be, and then invited people in to be part of the discussion. And again, you always learn that, wait a minute, this squad you have over here, it makes more sense over here, and here's why. We deliberately try to visualize the open hiring as well. And that is something that you might say, well, wait, we have it on our intranet, our wiki, or whatever internal tool. We have it on the job posting page. Well, that's great. But you can also do things to kind of really encourage people switching to find a new opportunity. Because a lot of the times I think people are, depending on, whatever's going on, people are aware of different opportunities out there in the world. And we want to retain people, and we want to encourage people to renew their careers within the company. So we visualize it, encourage this switching. We had an FAQ in here. We had this is the timeline for this reorg. There's some things that you can do to make it easier. I have a canvas that has what to consider when going through a larger kind of reteaming. Yeah, so I think giving people choice is really helpful. This is a even more maybe open way to do it, with like a marketplace where you facilitate team building through a set of specific activities. There's a great book called Creating Great Teams by Sandy Momoli and David Moll, which talks step by step about how to facilitate an offsite where people are switching teams, and you do it in an open way. But I found a lot of success in doing it with whiteboards as well, and more of an asynchronous way, where maybe you have some different meetings over by the whiteboard through a period of time. There's a wonderful story in my book, Dynamic Reteaming, about how a tribe reorged at Spotify. Christian Linwall, who I think heads machine learning at Spotify in New York these days. But he told a very fascinating story that inspired us to have a reorg in a very similar open way. And if you think this is Procore, and if you think about this, it kind of aligns with our value of openness. Sometimes sometimes people do not have choice in reorg. So it's kind of, how do you coach people to thrive when others are making the decision about how we're going to reorg? It's a fact. If you're going to acquire another company and the teams are going to be integrated, you might not have an opportunity to do things like this. But what if you did? What if you could find a middle ground? I think it's important to talk about it and see how where you could get with those kind of ideas. All right, so encouraging renewal and learning is another way that you can focus on this to make it easier when you scale your company. Encouraging renewal and learning. You know, like we said before, sometimes we just want to switch teams. We're sick of working with the same people. We want to learn something new from other people. It's not just switch the topic and suddenly everything's better. Sometimes maybe we even want to move and sit in a different part of the building or a different office. We just, you know, want some change. And I think depending on your personality, how long you've been on a team, it might make sense to consider a switch. And I like to encourage people to take this tip from the book, Designing Your Life, Burnett and Evans. They have a wonderful book and give wonderful workshops about kind of re-architecting your life. But they have this concept of a good time journal. So think about your current situation. Think about last week. When were you energized and what were you doing? When did you feel like you were stagnating? When did you feel like the work that you were doing, you were so engaged in it that like time went really fast, you felt like you were in flow? So encouraging people to kind of, you know, managers can do this with people. You can do it with each other. Coaches can facilitate things, but actually like paying attention to how you feel at work, I think is important when you're trying to encourage learning and growth. And as our companies change, things tend to get kind of uncomfortable. And so leaning into personal growth and development, I think, is a really like solid thing that you can do, because if you develop yourself, if you develop your learning, you can always take that with you. And it's a really good focus, especially in times of change and transition where things aren't settled yet, or you're in a waiting period, which happens quite frequently with large changes. So inviting switching and renewal is another thing. You can grow your career at the current company, but you need to know about the opportunities. So having a board with the hiring can encourage people within your company to apply. And again, you can have virtual forms of this as well. This is a guild that emerged out of that open space I was telling you about before. A nomading guild emerged. So the engineers wanted to facilitate for each other. How can I switch to another team, maybe for a short term for a couple of weeks and then go back? So what this helpful group of engineers did for each other was they broker the nomading. So this is the switching pattern. The pattern picture is in the bottom right here. And so the idea that these friendly engineers had is, well, we see the value of cross-squad pollination. That's the term that they used in our open space. And we want to facilitate helping each other find a new learning experience. And so they created a Google spreadsheet with, these are the squads that are open for a nomad right now. This is what you would learn if you would join this squad for a short period of time. And they facilitate that kind of for the people who are interested. You just kind of join their chat channel and inquire within. And I thought this was like super cool because they took ownership over it. They know it's important to continue learning, and they're doing it through nomading. So I think as your company is growing and changing, there's a lot of different learning opportunities to really lean into. And this is one way that you can do it as well. Don't mess with a good thing. So I think, you know, sometimes it's misinterpreted like, you know, bust up all your teams, change it all, nomading, like it's all really quick and happening all at once. I think that's not really the case. What I'm just trying to point out is it's going to be inevitable that your teams are going to change and that your company is going to change as you grow. If you find a good situation for yourself or for your team, you can keep it together. Like there's nothing that's saying like, don't keep an awesome, productive, happy team together. They're delivering value. If it's an enjoyable experience, if people would say, yeah, we recommend working on this team, keep that team together. But not everything lasts. That's a thing to be aware of. So how can we have a pulse check of the team health? So that's like one of the metrics to pay attention to. Squad health, organizational health. There are different tools that you can use to keep tabs on these kind of things as you're growing and changing. Culture Amp is one, Peakon is one. The good old classic Spotify health check, you can find the instructions for how to do that online. You can modify it for your use it at a regular cadence in a squad. I think it has to be owned by a squad to make it effective. Can't be this top-down thing. So reflecting and deciding how to shift is the final way to make it easier as your company is scaling. So thinking about stuff like that, I think as a team, there was one team that I was working with, and they were like, we're growing so big, we think we should split in half. So like, okay, well, we're gonna split. But then they were doing multi-platform development. So they had some web applications that they were building. They had some mobile applications that they were building. And there were two at the time, iOS engineers, and they're like, oh, wait, we don't want to be separated. One of us on this side, one of us on that side, and these separate teams, like they still wanted to work together. And as a team, they talked about this shift, and they talked about, well, maybe since we want to pair, we'll just follow the priority. So when this team has higher priority work, we'll be over there. And when this team has higher priority work, we'll be over here. And, they made this decision to do this. And then after a while, they talked about it, and then they split back, and they had one here, and then they hired. But I think the point is engaging the team in the conversation about how can we be more effective? How can we pursue better ways of working together? Like having that be a thing that you talk about in a retrospective, I think is a really forgotten part of Agile. Because we've always kind of like had that dogma, well, just try to keep the team the same. Like, no, it's a sacred thing. You can't really talk about it. But I think if the teams have that lever to discuss, it can help them at least own their development, own their ability to get better at what they do. That's the spirit of that. Hunter Industries, wonderful company. They make sprinklers and other products in Southern California. That's where the mob programming movement originated with Woody Zuhl, Chris Lucian, Jason Kearney, and others down here. What they do is that they have a very strong retrospective-based culture. There's stories in my book about Hunter. They're one of the case studies. And they decided that they had very open reteaming where people from one of these mobs could move over here, and it was just anything goes. And then through the process of reflecting on how their company morphed and changed and how they did this, they decided, you know what? That reteaming is too fast for us. We need to slow this down. But they made the decision in a retrospective, and they decided, okay, so what we'll do is if someone wants to switch to another mob, that they will talk about it. And if they find an agreement, then they will tell the management. And that's how they were doing it for a time. And then they would have, like, if you want to switch, but you need help, talk to this person. They made it easier if, it sounded daunting to somebody. But the point is, this kind of reteaming pattern emerged from a retrospective. So I think you can really experiment your way forward as a team and decide how to morph. People are trusted to facilitate themselves for greater effectiveness to get objectives done. Why not trust them to do that? So we talked about a lot of things here. I think, in general, it's inevitable that our teams are going to change. I talked about 5 ways to make it easier as this happens. So we might as well get good at this stuff. I think I'm ready for some Q&A now, and it looks like we have a decent amount of time for that, which is good. But this is my LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect with me and on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to do that. And there's my website, how to get a hold of me. So thank you so much.
Heidi, that was excellent. Thank you so much. So I'll walk you through our Q&A right now. Just for everybody else who's on the call, you can join our Slido and upvote questions that you want to hear answers to. I just reposted that link in the chat. But we do have several questions, and some of them were pretty active. We have some great upvotes on them. So if it's all right with you, I'll go ahead and ask you a few of these.
Yeah.
So number 1, how do you know when it's time to reteam? Are there specific signals that you want to look for?
Yeah, I'm just writing this down. How do you know when it's time to reteam? So I think that's a very good question. I think let's take a look at these patterns for one. Growing and splitting, for example. If you find your team has grown to 12 or more members, let's say, And things are taking longer than they used to. It doesn't feel like you're as productive as you were before. Your stand-ups, you can't keep them to 10 minutes. Your planning is going on and on and on. You find that the work is really becoming unrelated. You're really kind of moving away from each other. Those are usually signals that maybe the team is too big. And oftentimes, just like in biology, when cells divide, we find that these teams want to split. So those are some signals for that. Maybe another sign that how do you know when it's time to reteam? If when you hire people, let's talk about the 1-by-1 pattern. You hire a person, put that person in a team. Well, then sometimes maybe you hire 10 people at once. Well, where are you going to put those people? You have to have the discussions about it. Sometimes you might have a mandate to grow in your company, like we're going to expand our workforce and we're going to double in size. So this is really a mandate. So it's up to the people of how to make it happen. So sometimes we get these directives and we want to support our companies because we want to accomplish the company goals and their business decisions. So sometimes we're told that something is going to happen, and then it's like, okay, well, we get that. We try to understand why, and then we try to make it easier. We try to support and help our companies succeed. With isolation, it could be that you're starting something brand new and the work is so different from the other work that you were doing, especially if you're building a new product and you're doing a lot of discovery. That versus working on a product that's already existing takes different feedback loops. So you have more unknowns. And so working in a team that, let's say, follows Scrum and that has a very predictable cycle, doing the maintenance work, you might need faster feedback loops, and it's just easier to do if you start a new team. You can have a different kind of focus. Sometimes work drives the reteaming. Switching, somebody wants to change. Maybe you want to deliberately spread information across your company. If you have a team that is owning commerce features that process rent payments in the billions of dollars, you want to spread that knowledge so that more than one team can support this feature. So there are some companies that deliberately switch to spread information. Pivotal Labs Cloud Foundry, I interviewed Evan Willey from that company, told me stories about how they would deliberately reteam to spread knowledge around at a regular cadence. So they decided as a business that this is what they wanted to do. So I think it helps to talk about the different patterns how do you know it's time to reteam?
Excellent. That's a really good answer. Thank you. And so I find this next one interesting because I can relate to it personally, and it kind of ties in with what you're talking about on the reteaming. It says, how do you address formal reporting structure so team members reporting to different managers when you're engaging in a reteaming? So you're going for the reteaming, but yet people are reporting in different places. How would you advise a team through that?
People are reporting to different managers. Okay, so as I understand this, so the before state is that the managers are with the people close to the teams, but then the after state is that the managers are going to be not as close. Maybe I'm the manager, but somebody else, other people are on teams and I'm not with all of those teams. That's how I understand the question.
Yeah.
Mark has some clarification there.
That was my question.
Okay.
And the context I meant is if everybody on a team is reporting to one manager and everybody on another team is reporting to a different manager, then when reteaming is happening, we might end up with team formation that has some people reporting up one path and other people reporting up another path within the organization, and what that can cause turf confusion. And I'm curious if you run into that, and if so, how you address it.
So I think really if the idea is to reteam like that, and you have that sounds like a very tight coupling with manager and team, and it almost sounds like you'd have to go through the manager to get things done or something like that. I think for a reteaming to be successful, where there is some fluidity between teams, they have to be part of the discussion. And so how do you want to be in this new reality of this person is not in my reporting chain, but they're on this team? Like, it's not something to do without the manager. So I would include them in the discussion about it, try to understand, like, well, what are we going for? Why are we doing this anyway? I mean, we need to have a good reason for why we're going to reteam. It's not just do it because it's cool. You know, it's like, well, why are we doing it? They need to be part of the discussion. What challenges might we expect? What benefits might we expect? And just work together on that. I mean, it could be a good part of the growth or morphing of the company of, well, how can we be one kind of like whole as opposed to these silos? So involve them in the discussion.
That's excellent. Thank you. And I'll say I've seen that myself a lot of times. I think turf confusion is such a great phrase there. I really appreciate that, where, you know, manager says, I worked hard to get 10 people under me and I'm not letting you have one. So,
well, it's like, I think it's an anti-pattern I write in my book called the hoarding anti-pattern. Like, if you're just trying to keep these people on your team for your benefit, it's like, it's not necessarily what's best for the person. Rachel Davies talks about some stories. She's an XP-oriented coach and developer in the UK. And it's kind of like, well, how do we help the whole company succeed? We're not these separate companies together hoarding the employees. Like, it's kind of, you know, so that, you know, it's definitely an anti-pattern to get over.
Excellent. All right. Our next question is, if the teams reteam often, how can we know their velocity, as it may be very volatile as the team shifts? So how can we get their velocity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So velocity, if that's something that's important to you, know that when your team is going to change, your velocity is going to take a dip, and that after a while you can get to more of a more stability, ideally, if your system is not being gamed and used inappropriately. Let's imagine that it's like this system that's really working for you. Any kind of change, whether you hire somebody in, one of the more common changes probably for reteaming is that you're definitely, it's going to take time to get that person up to speed. Hopefully you're pair programming or doing something pair work together to try to help that person get over that new hire dip. But it's going to slow down a bit. But is it worth it for the long-term gain? We think so, which is why we tend to hire people and grow our teams. It's the same thing if you take a look at lead time. It's going to take a little bit of time for things to get more stable. If you do things where you're measuring the time that we start to the time that we deliver something, that kind of lean metric, it's probably going to be a little bit uneven, and then maybe you can try to get it to more of a stable state. And the faster you do it, you know, these are all discussions to have in retrospectives, right? So when do we turn the dial up on the hiring or the team changes, and when do we dial it down? You know, I would hope that the teams have some sort of input into that speed of reteaming and the ability to say, hey, this is a little too fast for us. Kind of like that story I just shared about Hunter, that it's not switch it all around as quick as we can. That's not it. The dynamic reteaming gets kind of misinterpreted like that. People think it's like super fast all the time. No, that, you know, that could really get you into some trouble. You know, these are not things to be taken lightly. But yes, you will dip and then come to some sense of, after you kind of focus on the people, the work and the workflow, do some practices to gel us together, it could be easier. One of the things that I like to do is to, okay, how can we game that to lessen the impact, right? So let's imagine that we have teams together that have merged and that we want to form and reteam around some opportunities that are important to our company. Well, if you try to gel that whole group of people, then maybe later when we switch, it's a bit easier because at least the people aren't strangers. So what can you do to foster like community building across multiple teams so that later, if you're switching, at least the people like have had a conversation before. So I think there's things that you can do to try to game that. But I think in general, it takes a little while to like get back up to speed. Having default patterns for a team to work in is also something that you can do. And I think that was like one of the intentions with like the Scrum Guide. Okay, so when we start, we just follow the Scrum Guide, we get good at that, and then we kind of deviate from that. I think that was the spirit of and intent of some of the original Scrum movement, which always kind of resonated with me, because it's like, okay, here's our default, but then we use retrospectives to kind of get better at what we do. Having a default for teams can be really helpful. So.
Excellent. Well, that kind of also ties into this then. So the next question is, chemistry is vital to a team. There's also an adjustment curve. Any advice on timing of when you know they will gel or not, or can they decide that?
Oh gosh, that's a really wonderful question. All right, chemistry is vital. Like, here's the thing. It's like, how can we, some people might say, and I was a software engineer, I used to work with Jane. She said to me once, and she drew a picture on a whiteboard of a network. And she was like, see this? These are the relationships between the different software engineers that we have here. And she's like, not all managers are aware of these dynamics, or aware of these, like, these two people don't really get along very well. And these get on, maybe you'll see people going and having lunch and you'll imagine they're friends and all that. She's like, but we know this kind of like shadow network of relationships and people. So maybe if we were able to choose the teams that we worked on, we'd have a greater chance of having chemistry, because at least we know that, I'm not going to put myself on a team with this person just because we don't get along, and we know it. But not all of the management may be aware of that. And so we might have more conflict later, or who knows, so then it's a question like, okay, well, so do we just let everybody choose their own teams, maybe give some constraints, because you can't have like 20 developers on one team necessarily. Well, maybe you could, but like, what are the constraints? Like, which are the roles we need on our teams? In that book, Creating Great Teams, they have like, all right, each team has a mission, maybe a poster of, this many developers, this many quality assurance, this many product managers, et cetera. We need these constraints. And I think, but maybe we want like some sort of diversity on our team, so we get different ideas. And the research shows that if we have this diversity, then maybe it'll be a more effective team. I think it's a really complicated question. I think so. Can giving people choice increase the ability to have chemistry? I don't know. Could it be that managers are really in tap and get it right, and the people just kind of gel? I think there's almost something kind of magical when you get that group together. And when people ask me, hey, Heidi, remember when you were on that one team and it was just so wonderful? And I remember different teams in the past, and I remember they just all feel different because we're all different people together. But what to address like the timing of it, like, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Like, how long do we give it? And, it's almost kind of like, well, depending on your rate of growth in your company and the rate of changes, it could be, remember, it only takes one person to change the team system. So that could be happening every 2 months. And so it's kind of like, you just got to make the best of it and integrate the new people in. I don't think there's a magic number. But I think it is important to try to have a tradition of some kind of health check, or some kind of tapping into the sentiment of how people are doing. So focusing on like, engagement type data is the place where I lean, and really having a discussion about, well, what does it mean to have an effective team at our company, and really aligning with like the leadership about the definition of effective team or team with awesome chemistry. Like, well, what are we actually going for? We're pretty good at looking at, well, this is what we're trying to build, and here's our acceptance test. But, I challenge everybody, like, well, what are the acceptance tests for your awesome team? Like, what do you want a team to be like? And what is the experience like? Okay. And how are you going to benchmark at a regular cadence that you're actually getting that? So I think things like that are
excellent.
It's hard, right? Like this stuff, people have been studying teams and team effectiveness for many, many years. There's a lot that you can read about it, but I think really kind of taking that time to sift through the research and coming up with an opinion for your company and really aligning on that and trying to go for that is where I would turn.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Heidi. That was, man, really, really good. We've gone right up to almost our time. And so I know Heidi's going to close us out. Handful of questions left, but I don't know, maybe we can pick those up in a podcast or something later on. So Heidi,
I'd love to have those questions, by the way. And I would encourage people, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love talking about this stuff. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heidi. We really, really appreciate your time. We'll
Definitely.
take questions and we'll post the recording on our website. Those of you who don't know, it's coachingagilejourneys.com. Please join us next week for John Jorgensen with how to work with leaders who go first. And Heidi, any last moments about any social public events that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Let's see. I will be in New York next week, co-facilitating a Liberating Structures meetup group with Dana Pialeva. So you can find out about that at HeidiHelfand.com. And then coming to Florida for Lean Agile US in, I believe, February. So
great.
So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much again, Heidi.
My pleasure.
Thanks
for having me.
Morning.
Thank you.
Bye, Heidi.
Thank you, Heidi.
Take care. Mm-hmm.